Okay, so we are live. This is the Conor Chepenik Podcast in person. I'm here with Dan, who is co-host of the Boston Bit Devs, which is a great event. Anyone in the area, I highly recommend checking out. And I'm excited to discuss Payjoin today. So just to kick it off, Dan, I'd love to have you give a little introduction about yourself and an introduction to what Payjoin is and why it's so important for the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Sure, Connor. Thanks for having me. It's great to see you at Bit Devs all the time, so good to jam on a podcast now, too. My name's Dan. I've been working on Bitcoin privacy for, I like to say, the better part of a decade, since around 2017. I started with the BU Research Lab, doing undergrad research on this thing called Tumblebit, which was a way to do payment channels and a Tumbler mode in a few transactions with a liquidity pool. It's kind of like Arc, actually. And that turned into work on an iOS app because Tumblebit didn't really work out. There were a few issues. You needed to front all the liquidity to make it work, and there wasn't regulatory clarity at that time. So even though I worked on that for a long time, the company Stratus that spearheaded the effort just gave up on it. They didn't want to run a coordinator. So I worked on CoinJoin stuff following the Wasabi guys. I forked that and had a couple people together work on Chaincase app for iOS app. And iOS, I don't think is a bottleneck on Bitcoin privacy. If you think about it, take a step back, one application is not going to solve Bitcoin privacy. So for the past couple years, I've worked more on the systems aspect of Bitcoin. Why, as a system, does Bitcoin not have privacy as default? And if there were a system that you could use on Bitcoin today without any forks, what would that look like? And that's when I started focusing on Payjoin in particular, which we're going to get into, and more broadly writing an SDK, focusing on Rust, focusing on writing a code base that you can embed all over the place to get privacy without too many dependencies like Tor. Like, we need something that we all can agree on.
100%. Can you riff a little more on what you mean by you don't think iOS is a what was the word you used there? I don't want to misquote you. It's not an attack vector per se, because with the whole, obviously it's been news that Apple is making dominance change the Zap features, and like, to be perfectly candid, I love iPhone. I love my Apple products. I mean, I got a MacBook here. I'm a big fan of iOS, but I also do get annoyed that they're taking away the Zaps features, and I see that as an attack vector. So I'd love to hear you kind of just elaborate on that point a little more as someone who is upset with iOS, but also so entrenched in the Apple ecosystem that it'd take more pain for me to transition away from iOS, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't know that I got bummed out with iOS so much as that. I think the word I used was bottleneck. Like, there's a reason we don't have Bitcoin privacy. We haven't come to consensus on a way to make it private. There's a whole lot of different tools that people use, but there's not something that almost everyone uses, or even the Bitcoin aware people, the people that are focused on Bitcoin and want to use it privacy, agree that, okay, this is a good idea, in the same way that on the internet, we know HTTPS works pretty well for encrypting connections. You still leak metadata. If you want to browse privately, you can use Tor. Like, there's some well understood things. In Bitcoin, it's a lot more controversial. When I was working on it, there definitely was a lot of questions. Why are you using iOS? Isn't Apple going to deplatform you? And that could be a problem. Obviously, Damus is running into problems, and Zeus is running into problems now. Just the Apple review process, you have that gatekeeper that makes it a lot harder. So that doesn't even address the core of the issue, which is trying to do Chummy and CoinJoins in iOS requires Tor to do the identity management. At least it did at that time. And the way we coordinate together to get privacy requires us all to be online at the same time, which doesn't really work with iOS in the background. The operating system doesn't let you take processing time. It won't do computation at a random interval. It'll say, is any other app using this? Do you have enough battery? Are you connected to the internet? So stepping back, the approach is, what can we build that is asynchronous, can run everywhere, and has a positive failure state. So with this chain case app, the failure state was nobody succeeded and nobody got privacy. The failure state should be maybe if one person in the round doesn't participate, you have a slightly smaller round. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually talking with Super Testnet, and when he made his Magic Web Store, one of the things he mentioned is that like iOS, and I'm sure Android's probably the same way, any app that's like trying to run a function, it's very selective about that. And the second, it doesn't want to give you that compute, it won't just like let it wait asynchronously. It's like if you're done using that compute, it's going to cut it off to try and save battery life. And that is just something interesting to think about. Versus like a laptop, I'm sure is a little less stringent because it's probably got more battery, bigger operating, more hardware to actually let you use that compute.
Yeah, I've been focused on the way Signal approaches software because they've been, in my view, the most successful with consumer-centric privacy. You have PGP, which people can use, but it requires a lot of learning. You have Bitcoin, of course. People still lose their coins all the time. So their ability to wrap encrypted messaging in a beautiful presentation that is an application that my family actually does use because it's so easy. I don't know where I started that sentence, but that's the approach I'm interested in. That's the approach I want to go after. And they made it really easy to follow. They actually have contribution rules. They have guidelines on their philosophy. They're like 6 rules for their design approach. And I haven't seen Bitcoin projects, privacy projects follow that. And I think there's a lot to learn from where they've failed and where they're going. And their first rule is if you're presenting the user with options, you might have made a wrong turn. I think that one's critical. Just don't burden someone with decisions. And later on, they talk about the world being asynchronous, meaning our phones aren't online all the time. We go in and out of different networks and different capabilities, and the operating system won't give us batteries, like Super Testnet said. So by making the protocol not require both devices or everyone participating to be online at the same time, we have a good shot of making something that works and people can actually use.
Yeah, I think your head is in the right spot because PGP, for those who don't know, is pretty good privacy. And it's super cool, but unless you like computers and you play with them all the time, most people just aren't going to use a command line interface. To your point, the non-technical people are just going to open an app and it's expected to work. And while I haven't really studied the Signal code, I've heard great things about it. And yeah, it just works and it encrypts your messages. And creating a front end that is just seamless so the user doesn't even worry about it. I mean, I'm a Bitcoiner, I'm not a shitcoiner, but I think Brave, and I'm sure there are problems with their browser, but like that's another example of something that's just, it's so much better privacy-wise than like a Google Chrome or something. And my girlfriend, I got her to use it, and at first she's like, I don't want to change browsers, Google. It's just what I know. It's just easy. And she's usually like, oh, this is great, and it gives me some money. And obviously, I told her like, hey, sell those BAT tokens for BTC. but just the fact that it's like a seamless experience, and Signal's the same way. And I think for privacy tools on Bitcoin, it's so important to just have that asynchronous ability to just have a user open it and not even have to think about it, and just have that privacy baked in on the back end. Because most users, to your point, I mean, some people will use it and that's awesome, but I'd say like 99% of people, if not higher, are just going to expect it to work. They're not going to think about the trade-offs that are involved when, you're trying to think about privacy and, be really conscious about your online presence.
And not everyone has the same privacy concerns. A lot of people...
That's a great point.
They just don't even necessarily... We want everyone to have baseline privacy because without that, you run into problems where if it's opt-in, people just don't use it. But even with Bitcoin, some people use just Lightning. They make small payments that are instant. They don't need or want to manage a UTXO and bid in the block space market. So... my focus is still around the on-chain privacy. That's the foundation that all of the layers above that for payments are built on, and it's still sorely missing. And Lightning does solve a lot of problems for privacy, but it's not perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dig into Payjoin. Can you give like a high-level overview of Payjoin, and then talk about the ways you hope to integrate it so it is that seamless experience, so it's not opt-in, it's just almost all transactions are Payjoin trends. I mean, that's obviously what we're hoping for.
Yeah, that is the hope, is to have everyone collaborate and make every spend a coin join. And the way you do that in reality, to me, seems to be Payjoin. That's the one way to do it. So from a high level, you can think of Payjoin as the most simple way for multiple people to collaborate on a transaction. Why would you want that? When simple wallet software sends Bitcoin, and Satoshi even mentioned this in the white paper, the inputs to the transaction all come from one person. And because of that, anyone that's looking at the blockchain trying to gain info can assume, okay, any transaction's inputs must belong to the same user. As soon as we break that, say I want to send you money, Connor, if I contribute input and you contribute input, we break that heuristic, and that assumption that the spies on the blockchain are using is just incorrect. So their analysis becomes less accurate.
So companies like Chainalysis, essentially, their whole billion-dollar business, which I think you could definitely make an argument that a lot of that's propped up by governments, trying to surveil that business. I don't want to say it's completely rendered obsolete, but it really hurts their entire business model, which, privacy is a human right. It's something that everyone should have, especially something as important as money. So personally, I'm a fan of that because I think it's wrong what Chainalysis did. And I'm blanking on the guy, but the case that they're claiming the guy ran the Bitcoin fog thing, if you listen to that, I'll have a link to Peter McCormick's podcast with the two attorneys for the guy the U.S. is accusing of running Bitcoin fog. But it's just absolutely insane. And then to hear how Chainalysis was kind of spun up out of that, not to go on a tangent, but privacy is so important. And I don't know all the facts about that case, but from what I've heard, it's very frustrating to see Chainalysis become $1 billion companies on a heuristic that is a bit faulty.
They're already built on a foundation of sand.
Yeah,
it's craziness, and the documents in that case, as far as I can tell, they're based on assumptions even further from that one in the white paper, the common input ownership heuristic. They're just like, oh yeah, there's some money here we know he had, and some money here we know he had. There's a whole bunch of transactions in the middle, and obviously they're linked together. Yeah. It's all based on assumptions. I'm really interested to see how that proceeds.
Yeah, likewise. So Payjoin is better for privacy for sure, but another thing that, reading through some of your articles, it also seems like it's better for fees as well, correct? It can help, if you're doing batch transactions, whether you're exchange, whatever it is, it can save a lot of fees for people sending Bitcoin transactions, it seems.
Yeah, because we're interacting, that just gives us a lot more power. Bitcoin's great because it doesn't require interaction. I can post an address online and anyone can send money to that, and it comes with a lot of caveats. If we can communicate, we can communicate in order to collaborate rather than, what's the way to say this? Like Go talks, this programming language Go talks about using memory to communicate. Like you don't want to use the shared resource to communicate when you can instead communicate to coordinate your use of the shared resource. And Payjoin lets us do that. So in concrete terms, when we're talking about fees, in a low fee environment, you can consolidate your UTXOs so you spend less money when you pay with them later. With Payjoin, you can consolidate anytime you receive a transaction. So you can choose to use that incoming transaction where the sender is already paying fees and do your consolidation at the same time. So by doing the batching, you can get some transaction structure that doesn't necessarily reveal who paid who, and you can organize your wallet so that you have few UTXOs and it's less expensive for you to spend Bitcoin later. Or you can wait. In a high fee environment, you don't have to do that, but it just gives you more capabilities, and the trade-off is you communicate, which we're all connected to the internet. We should be communicating.
Yeah, 100%. So, any Bitcoiner hears that, it's like, well, hell yeah, this is fantastic. Why is this not implemented everywhere? This is, this sounds like, I guess what I'm asking is, what are the downsides? What are the challenges that Payjoin faces to making this the standard so people can have both the privacy benefits as well as the fee-saving benefits?
Yeah, the biggest one is you have to run a server to receive Payjoin, which people think of a server as a computer that's always on and connected to the internet and publicly accessible, which is the case now. But you can run a server and have that server be ephemeral. It only exists when your phone is up, and then it pings a separate actual server, relay like in Nostr, to coordinate with your peers. So that's been, in my view, the biggest issue to Payjoin adoption is there's no easy way to make yourself reachable on the open internet, and you need that for Payjoin. So that's why I'm working on the serverless Payjoin protocol. And then there's another issue, which is there's no common library until recently that lets people implement it in their software. So your big wallets like Electrum and Bitcoin Core and all of your various mobile clients, every enterprise has their own setup and would need to build the Payjoin application themselves. Now that we've got BDK and LDK, we've got these software development kits that let people take an off-the-shelf, well-tested library and just add it into whatever piece of software they want. Make a Bitcoin application, make a Lightning application, and I'm introducing Payjoin Dev Kit so you can take Payjoin off the shelf and integrate it with whatever Bitcoin wallet you have.
Nice. And that is a step up from Lightning in the sense that with Lightning, your node has to be on 24/7, 365. When it goes offline, those channels get closed. Whereas it sounds like with Payjoin, you could basically just turn on your node when you need it. You know, if you had a serverless architecture, just whenever you need to actually, have that server on, you can turn it on. With Lightning, it's like if that node gets turned off, then those channels will close, and you have to go through the process of reopening them, which then obviously there's fees associated with that, depending on the fee environment, can get quite expensive quite quickly if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah, Lightning has that persistent channel state. So if your counterparty is online while you're offline, they might be able to replay an old state and attack you in some way. Payjoin's all about coordinating the settlement. So there's no intermediate state where you could be punished. I think it's more suitable for an asynchronous protocol. It's a much simpler piece of software. The Lightning Network involves all this networking, all this state management. Payjoin is really, like I said, it's the simplest interactive transaction. Lightning's interactive too, in that we both collaborate to build this payment channel and then update the state of the payment channel. But with Payjoin, we really are just coordinating the settlement, and we can even use it to coordinate the settlement of Lightning channels, to open them at least. Closing them is a different story, but you can put almost any kind of Bitcoin settlement into a Payjoin as long as you can coordinate the creation of that settlement with your counterparty, then you can benefit from it.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like Nostr too. I know we talked about this last night. How Nostr makes it even easier because you can now ping these relays, and it's really exciting what Nostr enables. I mean, also like with the Magic Web Store, like I talked about Super Testnet. It's just I think a lot of times it's hard to see the innovations and the products that'll be built until you have these things built on top of it. You know what I mean? Just look at the Lightning Network, and then now we have Nostr. We have all these things, and I mean, I don't know how it plays out, but it just seems like the speed of development and the passion Bitcoiners have. I don't, no matter how much money the state can throw at a company like Chainalysis to try and surveil everyone, it just seems like there are so many passionate developers and individuals and Bitcoiners, spending their time willingly to make this system better in regards to fees, in regards to privacy and all these things. So it makes me very hopeful. And I'm curious for Payjoin, what do you see being the most important thing to bootstrapping this to be successful? One of the questions I had is, what is the easiest way to use Payjoin for someone who runs a node but might not be that technical? Are you thinking about more so just targeting, users of the network, node runners, or do you think it's more important that people who actually have wallets, big exchanges integrated, or just kind of like across the board, everyone should be, implementing the standard?
Everyone should be implementing the standard, but practically you have to approach the problem with as much resources as you have, as many resources as you have. And I think the people that actually have the most to benefit right now would be the enterprises, because if you have a Payjoin receiver, it gives you the opportunity we talked about earlier to reduce your fee spend. And they're already running servers that are online all the time. So there's work on that. There's testing being done, and there will be a rollout at some point this summer. It's also important to have the end user wallets support it, because if none of them support it, no one can send Payjoin. So that's being worked on too. And then the current state of things is the easiest way to do it if you run a node is to use a BTC Pay server. They make it really easy in their interface if you have a hot wallet to just set it up and start Payjoining. What they should do too, and it's a little more complicated, is if you have Lightning enabled, you should just use the hot wallet that Lightning uses to Payjoin. You shouldn't need a separate hot wallet to do that, which you do right now. So if you run like a cold wallet BTC Pay server where your addresses are generate cold, then you have no inputs to contribute as a receiver to the Payjoin, because we both contribute inputs. That's where we get privacy, part of it. But if you have a Lightning node already, you already have a hot wallet with outputs. And this is where it gets really exciting with splicing, because you could even have the input to a Payjoin be an open Lightning channel with splicing, and you just change that channel, you update that channel. So yeah, across the board, we got to get Payjoin all over the place. Bull Bitcoin's working on an integration.
Right.
Bitmask app just launched mainnet, I think last week. So that works in the browser with WebAssembly, which opens up a whole number of applications that are already using BDK, because Bitmask uses BDK, so they can use that. Summer of Bitcoin, there's a student, shouts out Will, working on an integration with the Payjoin CLI, the BDK CLI. So that tool by BDK is going to be robust and support Payjoin. So it's happening slowly. I mean, we also need better documentation and branding. Like the whentaproot.org website is awesome. Have you seen that before?
I'll check that out.
So it does a great job of shaming the exchanges that don't support Taproot.
Is it W-E-H?
It's called whentaproot.org, yeah.
Nice.
And so there's a payjoin.org, but it's sparse. I've been really focused on the serverless component, fixing the parts of Payjoin that make it difficult for anyone that doesn't run not just a node, but a public-facing node with a domain name. But we need that branding around Payjoin. We need that community support, and we're getting more of that. We really are. I've been fortunate to be sponsored by Human Rights Foundation and Bob Space in Thailand, in Bangkok. And yeah, I feel the momentum growing. I think people get it when you put it plain to them what can be done, but unless that work is done, people just don't know it. And there's the issue compared to other privacy solutions where there's not a direct profit motive, because it's a peer-to-peer protocol where if I want to send you money, we're the only ones that interact, there's no third party. That makes it difficult to justify the investment it takes to write the software.
Yeah. I think that point's so key. There has to be that incentive. And like, yeah, privacy is great. And I think most sane people can be like, yeah, privacy is important. But if there's not an incentive to upgrade, the protocol to be more privacy minded, no one's just going to do it altruistically. Maybe a few people, but the vast majority of people are just not going to be like, oh yeah, like this is important. It's going to be the fees going through the roof because ordinals or whatever, and then exchanges being like, my users are pissed because they're having to, if you're withdrawing, say, 500,000 Satoshis, but it might cost 500,000 Satoshis to make that withdrawal, well, then there's no point in doing it. You get no, maybe that's like, if it costs.
Well, no, there is no point. You're right. And I think that's why the regular CoinJoin stuff hasn't been able to take off at the enterprise level, because the same way like Lightning has, because there's no tangible cost-saving benefit to it, versus Payjoin, even if it's in its most basic form, where it's just literally the exchange runs the server and the sender, their wallet's connected to the internet, they can benefit from the fee savings and a bunch of the batching, but it does require software and integrations and, taking a chance to test some things out and invest in innovation.
Yeah, and then it's a win-win for both the exchange and the user because the exchange has to pay less fees. Their exchange's customer is happier, so that customer is likely to go back to the exchange. And then the customer on the receiving end, they don't get so much of their Bitcoin paid to the miner. And like, yeah, shout out to miners, appreciate the service they provide to all Bitcoiners. But obviously, every time I send a transaction, I want to pay as little as I have to get my block confirmed. And whatever, if it's a high priority, whatever it is. So yeah. That's really exciting, and we need to get the
If there's enough demand for block space too, if the mempool is always a gigabyte, it doesn't really matter if a few people pay less in fees. There will still be that, as long as there's still full blocks, the miners are making the same amount of money.
100%. So thinking about, we talk about how like technology builds on itself, and now with Nostr and stuff, there's all these exciting new things being built at such an incredible speed, it's hard to keep up with. What are some of the features that, I know there's some things, like you gotta, like the serverless thing you gotta nail out before, but what are some of the features that you're most excited for if this is successful, if we can get more exchanges, more users, et cetera, more wallets to integrate it? What are some of the most exciting things that haven't been built per se, but that you've kind of been speculating on and that you'd love to build in the future?
Yeah. In terms of Payjoin specifically?
In terms of Payjoin.
The most exciting thing for me is being able to transact in Bitcoin and have some peace of mind that there's no deterministic link between all of my hops. If I, pay a large bill, I know that that person that I'm paying can't just look at my wallet and associate all my Bitcoin together and potentially put a target on my head. And I know that peace of mind, especially for high net worth individuals, is going to make a big difference in their desire and their comfort using Bitcoin. So that's like the biggest thing for me is really, I think the privacy is a key component of Bitcoin that's like worse than the banking system right now in a lot of ways, because that full transparency is there. If you meet someone and sell them some Bitcoin, someone you've never known, they can see your whole stash, basically, roughly, and that's dangerous. I'm really excited for the serverless stuff because I think it's going to enable wide deployment, meaning if it's easy to use, people are more likely to use it. They don't have as much of a hurdle in order to get to the point where they're using the software. And same for the fee savings. I think I'd like to spend less in fees, and combined with splicing, the kind of user experience you could get where you just pay whatever invoice is presented to your wallet, whether it's Lightning, whether it's on-chain Bitcoin, wherever the payment destination is, if you can interact to negotiate that, that's like the pay-to-endpoint concept that's related to Payjoin. That seems like a dream come true to me. You just scan and click.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, you think, especially for people who just come into Bitcoin and aren't as familiar, like if someone sends you Bitcoin from their wallet and you have that transaction ID, you can see exactly where they come from. And if that person is just a giga whale or has 100 Bitcoin or something, that's very risky. I mean, you wouldn't walk around, obviously 100 Bitcoin is worth more than 100K, but like imagine walking around with 100K in cash and, you go to buy soda at the store and the guy just like pulls this fat wad of cash and the guy's like, oh shit, it really increases the incentives for someone to attack you or do something malicious because they see that. And I think, I don't think most people who are just getting into Bitcoin have 100 Bitcoin at this point, but just that idea that, you can preserve your privacy and not have to worry about someone literally opening up mempool.space and just copying and pasting that transaction ID to see how much you have in your wallet is so crucial and something that I think often gets overlooked. I know personally, like, I've definitely opted to start using like a wallet of Satoshi, which has a custodial risk because I think their service is great, but if they rug me, it's like, well, I don't have any way to get back at them or get those funds, but I use it for small purchases because if I want to spend my Bitcoin, like I was in New York at PubKey and it was so cool paying with Bitcoin, but obviously like I'm not going to pull out my signing device and do my hardware wallet thing. Like that's just not feasible to try and buy a beer.
No. And the other feature that is related to this that I'm excited about is even if you have a hot wallet for your Payjoin, because it's interactive, the software can keep track of how much you have, and at regular intervals, instead of doing a typical consolidation where it's taking a bunch of small inputs and making a big one, to make fees in the future less. It can also change the destination. So you can batch transactions, which saves fees, but you can also substitute the hot wallet inbound for cold wallet. So like if I'm sending you some payment and it's like, oh, okay, my wallet's getting heftier than I'd actually carry in my pocket, the Payjoin server can automatically divert funds into cold storage on the fly.
Well, so theoretically too, could it also send funds, like say, you're going to get paid from someone, but then you also been meaning to pay someone for whatever bill. Could it also theoretically, you get that and then it just sends it to that other person? So for heuristics, I mean, it'd be nearly impossible for a Chainalysis or any company like that to have any idea where these funds ends up. It just makes it so much harder to track, which I think is a win for all Bitcoin users who want to remain private.
It increases the velocity of money too, like the amount of transactions that can fit into a block. If you do, I think that's called transaction cut through. It's a Greg Maxwell idea, like old idea. Shouts out Dave Harding for letting me know this idea already existed. But it's sort of a receiver side batching. So right now when you batch transactions, or when an exchange or a business batches transactions, because that's really the only people that are doing it at scale, they can batch the destinations, but they can't tell someone paying them where they'd like to be paid on the fly, or split that up into multiple destinations. And that's what this transaction cut through idea lets you do, which is like what you could do with cold storage or skipping the deposit to yourself and paying a bill that you were intending to pay anyway. It's so exciting that we have this new layer of batching available to us that gets rid of the upper bound of what we thought was the best we could do with batching. By doing transaction cut through, by making enforceable transactions that never have to get posted to the chain, is like infinite scaling. This is the whole idea of Lightning. You can do it for any on-chain settlement.
It also sounds a bit like ARK, and I haven't read like too much into it, but like isn't like that the idea of like the virtual transaction output of VTXO? It's it doesn't actually have to take place on chain until it does, but you have this like massive pool that people can just kind of swap back and forth, and from what I've seen on the docs, like in a trustless way, essentially, not have to worry about until they go to pull that out. Like it'll time out onto the chain, but a lot of transactions can take place off the chain, which will save a lot of people a lot of fees.
Yeah, that's the move. It's been years. People have tried so many different ways to gain the privacy in an incentivized way so that everyone either can have a UTXO or doesn't need a UTXO. And I'm glad this interest is kind of reviving during the, I don't know if it's a bear market or a bull market right now. During whatever market we're in right now. It gives me a lot of hope, and I think it's becoming more and more possible. Of course, I think Payjoin is the simplest solution. It's elegant. It works already. And the time is now to deploy it. It's possible.
Yeah. I think we're slowly starting to enter the bull market. I mean, who knows? It's anyone's guess. I like to say Bitcoin could drop 5K tomorrow, and it could go up 5K. And like you've been in Bitcoin long enough, that should not surprise you if it made a move like that. But I'm just watching like the whole Ornos things and the fee spike. I do wonder when or if that suddenly part hits. Like I'm just hopeful it's like just gradually, and just over time, fiat just slowly dies, and more people wake up to the fact that we shouldn't have money where one group of people gets to print it willy-nilly out of thin air, and then everyone else has to work for it. But if we ever do get to that point where it's just a mass awakening and people are like, oh my God, why have I been working for this money that central banks just create out of thin air? I need Bitcoin, and everyone rushes for that exit. Like we thought the ordinal stuff was crazy and the fee spiking. I can only imagine what it would look like if, like everyone loves bringing like how many millionaires are in the world. I know it's well above 21 million millionaires, and if everyone of them wanted a Bitcoin, and they're probably going to want more than one Bitcoin, at least because if they were to buy it today, if you're a millionaire, you could probably throw out 100,000, a million, whatever it is. So I I think it's very important that we start thinking about these things, especially in a bear market. And it's great to see people building tools like yourself, because if we ever do get to that suddenly part, that black swan event potentially, it's going to be wild. It's going to be a lot
It
of
is going to
mayhem.
be wild. Yeah, I love that you use the word awakening because it reminds me of the Great Awakening, like a religious revolution. 19th century America, everyone's missing religion. They're looking for something. They're gonna find it. Do you think Bitcoin is a religion, Connor?
Yeah. Yes and no in a way. Like, it's a cult, but it's the best of cults. It's like
Yeah, I'm
everyone
not
gets.
trying to figure out if you think it's good or bad, but like the qualities of it. You have some faith in Bitcoin. I think a lot of people do, and it's growing.
Yeah, I think it's the reason I say yes and no is because on the one hand, the Bible says like money is the root of all evil. I might be misquoting, but basically like money is the root of all evil, and obsessing over money is bad and negative. And I think that's true. And if Jesus got most upset at the people who were messing with the money, messing with the weight and measurements. And I think there is a lot of truth to that. Like, messing with the weight and measurements of money is a detriment to everyone who doesn't benefit from the Cantillon effect, or who doesn't get that freshly printed money. So obsessing over money is not good. But Bitcoin fixes that by essentially having a system where you can know, like, that capital T truth, like what is on the chain. You can verify for yourself that that is the actual truth. So I think it restores a fair form of weights and measures for money for the entire globe, which is so important. And in a way, if you look at the Bible, it's kind of been like 5,000 years a source of truth. Now, it's not perfect, and I think people's misinterpretations can cause a lot of bad shit. I mean, the Crusades weren't great. A lot of people died. But at the same time, I think the Bible's also been incredibly a net positive for people, and kind of a source of truth for just a guideline for how to live your life. And the best thing you can do is verify that for yourself. And I think Bitcoin is the same. It kind of, a lot of people come into it, and I think the Bitcoiners are correct. I consider myself a maximalist, and I think their way of going about it, and Odell, stay humble and stack sats, and verifying for yourself and making sure that you focus on the right things is good. But then you also have people who come in and misinterpret what this capital T truth now means that we have, and then they start scamming and shitcoining and promoting all these things. So it's a religion in the sense that, like, it returns truth to the world in a way, but it's also, I think, being obsessed with money, and I think Bitcoin's money personally. I think it's important to not, like, I love Bitcoin. I love thinking about it. I love talking about it, and I obsess over Bitcoin, but at the same time, I think it's it's kind of a contradiction, because I think it's important to not obsess over money. And when I say I obsess over Bitcoin, I don't think to myself I'm obsessing over money, because it is money, but it's also more than money, if that makes sense.
I think it is more than money, yeah, which is why it has some elements of religion. And you talked about it having these elements of truth. One thing that is hard for me to understand is like where the purity line is for Bitcoin maximalism. When do you begin sin coining? Like, what steps do you take that cross the line? I wish I understood, and I guess it's not necessarily clear in religion too. It depends on your orthodoxy, and those values aren't reflected in the scripture that is the white paper. The white paper is just it's really a high level technical spec. It's not even a complete specification. It just talks about proof of work, how transactions are constructed, some privacy considerations, mining. I guess that's proof of work. So yeah, it's something I've been thinking about more and more, because I see in American culture specifically, people are longing for meaning. And the people I know that are into Bitcoin don't struggle with that in the same way that other people I know do. They really truly believe in hard money, in work to create value and passing that on. There are rules about what you can and cannot do. You're not supposed to create money out of thin air. It's supposed to be earned. And it of course gives me meaning to be able to contribute to that and feel like I'm doing good for the world. and it's also confusing and existential at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, it is so hard to say like this is where I draw the line in the sand. I think the truth of the matter is that no one's like a like we don't have a Jesus in Bitcoin. No one's gonna die and revive, and everyone's a flawed creature. Is the point I'm trying to make? Everyone in Bitcoin is flawed, and I mean, if you look at like Roger Ver, like he did so much to onboard people, and like I read the block size rule recently, and like I can appreciate his perspective and the libertarian values, and I think he ended up becoming so obsessed with trying to onboard as many merchants, and I mean, obviously he made millions for being so early, and but I don't mean I guess that's a funny example because they literally called him Bitcoin Jesus.
Bitcoin Jesus, that's right. He's the son.
Yeah.
Roger fascinates me because, I've spent some time in Taiwan and he's totally into that. He lives in Tokyo. He's out. He's got that, I think he's got a St. Kitts citizenship, So he's, yeah, definitely a fascinating character. And many people would say he's a sinner.
Yeah, well, and he like his points make sense, but Bitcoin won. I mean, Bitcoin Cash. I mean, I guess it still has some market cap. And it's still
Yeah,
trading,
not
like,
really though. It's gone. It's done.
Yeah, Bitcoin won. I mean, that's like I don't want to say like, but I don't see ever how Bitcoin Cash could again try and compete with Bitcoin. And then rather than saying, all right, I was wrong. I still believe that big blocks might have been the way, but like this is what Bitcoin opted for. I'm gonna now pivot to the Lightning Network and Payjoin and all these things that can help Bitcoin scale. I think the small blockers made the right decision. I'm happy that we did not sacrifice the ability to go and verify for yourself, because I mean, it'd be very hard for anyone who wasn't an enterprise to go and have the compute power if we had increased the block size, or have a server with enough storage to actually contain the whole blockchain on their server. But he didn't. He became a quote-unquote sinner because he didn't accept the fact that BCH lost. Like, there might have been a time, like, when it first split, like, all right, we don't know. But clearly the market and the users and everyone has decided, no, this is Bitcoin. And then rather, than going and getting back to Bitcoin and continuing to whatever it is, use the Lightning Network, whatever, he just continued to double down. And I think he still supports BCH. So I think the most important thing is that people just, start learning these steps. I mean, there's so many things you got to understand Bitcoin, to take the time to run a node, take the time to verify for yourself, and trust your gut. I mean, deep down, like, there's no perfect line to say, oh, you're a good maximalist versus a bad one. There's always going to be haters. There's always going to be people talking shit on Twitter. I mean, there's no
spend less time on Twitter. That is the solution. Use the block button religiously.
100%. But the most important thing you can do is just on your own journey. Now, I was talking to someone after the BitDevs meetup just about the importance of Bitcoin and like our experience orange pilling our family. And one of the points that we made together is like, as much as we want to orange pill our family, I don't think a lot of people would understand what they have, and then they might not take the time to have a secure setup. And imagine if like you convinced someone in your family to buy a whole Bitcoin, right, at like today's prices. And then they did, and then Bitcoin does a 10x, and it's worth, rather than 25,000 today, it's worth 250,000. But that person just trusted you, and they didn't actually go and understand what they held. They didn't buy a hardware wallet. They did horrible setup, and then their Bitcoin gets hacked somehow because they didn't take the time to realize. So I think the most important thing you can do as a quote-unquote Bitcoiner is trust your gut. When something's wrong. If someone's trying to promote some altcoin or shitcoin or whatever, and that's wrong, don't go along with it. But then also try and encourage people to take the time to learn for themselves, because it's great if you can get someone to buy Bitcoin, but it's like the old analogy, like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And it's much more beneficial, rather than encouraging someone to just go and smash buy one Bitcoin and then forget about it and hope it does a 10x. Be like, no, take the time to learn about this. And like, this is a good security setup. If you want help with your hardware wallet, whatever it is, make sure they have the education. So when Bitcoin does its number go up thing, and whatever amount they bought is worth 10x what they had originally bought it for, they are prepared, they understand. Or if they buy it and then it drops 50%, they're not going to sell it at the Pico bottom and be even more pissed when it has a massive bull run.
The massive bull run is coming. Prepare your family.
There's no doubt about that.
I like the Uncle Jim model a lot for onboarding people. If you can give them a slice of your server so they have their own wallet, maybe you custody it, maybe it's in a Fedimint. That's why Fedimints are real cool to me too, because it's kind of like Uncle Jim. You have trusted people, so they can have the full functionality without managing it, and they can learn when their time comes. Some people say that's sinning too if you're promoting non-custodial Bitcoin. You got to know where the line is yourself. You got to have that. You got to have the faith that you know what's right and wrong. You can determine it.
Yeah, 100%. And be humble enough when you realize, like, after the fact, if you did something wrong, to be able to tell them. Just imagine like an Uncle Jim situation where you pretend to rug that person so they feel the anxiety. You're like, no, I got your Bitcoin, but you really shouldn't have.
Oh, you're a cruel friend.
So you mentioned Taiwan. I'd love to hear what is, I know you also work for the Taiwan BitDevs whenever you're out there. What is kind of like the difference in culture you see from like the Taiwan BitDevs versus, I guess, we're in Boston here, but just kind of like the U.S. versus Taiwan, and everything I've heard about Taiwan is just like glowing reviews. Everyone who's been there absolutely loves it. It works flawlessly. They have trains that go super fast. I mean, it sounds amazing, but I've never been to Asia, so I'm curious, like what your experience was in Taiwan.
Yeah, Taiwan Bitcoin in particular is interesting because they have the threat of communist invasion that persists over their head. So Taiwanese people are very curious in general about technology that's very developed. And because that threat is there and the money is not as strong as the dollar, it's not the reserve currency, people are very interested in just trying it out. I think compared to the US, where I don't know if it's just the fact that our money works and we have lots of options, because that exists in Taiwan too. They have electronic payments all over the place, just with QR codes and phones. But people are more reluctant in the United States to give Bitcoin a try than they are in Taiwan. And I think, especially if you bring up, if you needed to bug out of here and hold value, you could have a border wallet or you could have some Bitcoin on your phone that sells people really easily. And as far as savings too, the culture is different. I think we're a debtor economy, and that goes all the way down to the consumer is using their credit cards to spend. But in Taiwan, the culture is more savings oriented. People put a significantly greater fraction of their income into savings. So that's another thing that really resonates, and people have an easy time dollar cost averaging. The guys over there are doing a incredible job. The community has the opportunity to be the heart of Asia Bitcoin, in my opinion. You have Japan, which is a more difficult culture to assimilate into. I really want to visit Korea. I know they have a great scene too. Hong Kong has had a long-standing Bitcoin scene, but that's kind of volatile with the CCP and the rules over there. It seems like it's opening up, but I'm not sure. But yeah, if you're in Taiwan, definitely check out Taiwan BitDevs. They meet up roughly once a month in Taipei. I like to just ride my scooter over there and go to the mountains on the weekends. The food is good. The breakfast culture. Have you heard about the breakfast culture before?
No, what's the breakfast culture like?
Oh, that's very unique. People don't cook breakfast at home. You definitely go out to get breakfast, and you go to some family's shop typically. I mean, there's all different kinds. You can go to the engineered fast food one. You can go to the really traditional one where the guys wear the little paper hats, or you can go to the auntie on the corner who will make you your little egg roll, and you sit on the plastic chair while their kids are on the floor with the dog, playing some game, putting a puzzle together. Yeah, I haven't seen anything like it, but that's a lot of fun.
Out of curiosity, what is inflation like over there? Because I know you mentioned their currency is not as strong as the dollar, but one of the things that, I guess these past couple of years has been very apparent. If you are a debtor, you win in this system because your debts get easier to pay back as the money gets debased. And in the U.S., I think it just goes back to the point, pain's the best teacher, and if you're incentivized to take on debt, because, like the people who got levered up from whenever 2008 happened and it crashed, from like that point on, if you started getting levered up, up until 2020, it's like you were kind of a schmuck for saving, which is wrong. You shouldn't be punished for saving. Like, that's a noble thing. So you can save to buy your first house or buy your first car or start a business, whatever it is. Savers shouldn't be punished, but in our fiat economy, the savers get screwed, and the people who take on the debt, they kind of come out on top because they can pay back that debt earlier. And I'm curious what in Taiwan, it's kind of just brought about that culture of like people want to save, and I'm curious what inflation has been over there, because typically when you have high inflation, most people would rather take out loans, and no one wants to save in. I mean, even in the States, no one's saving in USD. They're going out and buying Apple stock or treasuries or, whatever it is, because they know if you're holding cash, you are getting screwed. You are just losing money as they create out of thin air.
Yeah, my experience of inflation in Taiwan has been, it was more severe over the past year than it was before. I think as much as 30% inflation on items like food and, CPI type stuff, basic necessities. The other thing that I notice apparently in my age group, my friends, is housing. Everyone likes to invest in housing to save money, and the interest rates on that were even lower there than they were in the US for the past decade. They've recently gone up for the first time in the past year, but I'm good friends with a doctor, and I don't see a path for him to buy a home in the city he works in Taipei. And this guy, he's gone through all the school. He's doing it's a little different, but doing basically his residency right now. And it's just like, I don't know how someone buys a home without a big dollar infusion from their family. It's difficult.
I mean, that's crazy. You think like a profession like a doctor, like obviously he's probably getting paid well, and to think you can't even buy a home. It's just so malicious. I've heard too that a lot of Chinese people will buy homes because that's like kind of the best savings they can have. Their capital markets are restricted. They can't take their money, and they can't go and buy U.S. equities or equities across the globe.
Yeah, that's not the case in Taiwan, though. Taiwan has access.
So that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think it's just like a similar culture? Because Taiwan has, as you just mentioned, it has access to all these investments that I guess the retail population of China doesn't because of their government. So you think that's just a cultural thing, or what's the motivation for people to do the same thing that they've done to real estate here in China as well?
There definitely is a cultural component where people are just comfortable with that, and there's more customs around. If you want to get married, you got to have the house, you got to have the car.
Oh, really?
I think so. People talk about it, but I think it's actually tangible. I think it's actually real, where there's more pressure for that. I need to understand more. I haven't tried to buy a house in Taiwan, so I don't really know what it's like, but it's expensive and increasingly expensive, and it's been a problem that they've been talking about more severely than what I've seen in Boston in terms of, young people especially being able to buy homes. And the other thing is Taiwan has more of a population issue than the United States does right now. So their birth rate is below replacement, and a big issue for young people like my friend is there's just no way for them to afford the space to raise children. Yeah. I don't know how that'll change. They have a lot of gold. They have an incredible amount of gold, the Taiwanese. So if you convince the right people, you might be able to get them on a Bitcoin standard money when they get off the fiat economy. We'll see when that happens.
I think that's important too. I mean, like, disclaimer: I'm not a China expert. I'm not a Taiwan expert. It's easy.
I'm
to
not
sit
either.
It's easy to sit here.
I have some experience to share.
100%, but it's easy to sit here and like play, geo macro politics, QB armchair expert. But I do hope and I do believe that Bitcoin could do a lot to mitigate the CCP from wanting to invade China. And I know Taiwan makes the majority of chips in the world, but if
they make all of the mining chips, they make all of them. The Bitcoin chips that are in the new ASICs are manufactured in Taiwan, all of them.
So that's obviously like incredibly important to the geopolitical sphere. And I wonder from China's perspective, it's like, well, shit, now these people can take their wealth with them. Like, if most people have their wealth in their home, there's so many incentives involved with that. Like one you just mentioned, people are less likely to have families if they don't have a home because you don't have the space to raise your kid, which is malicious, and it causes the problems that we're seeing now in places like Taiwan and China, where the population, they're going to have like all these old people retiring, and they're not going to have enough younger people to keep working. And I think that's a direct result of housing. And I mean, I'm not sure what our demographics are in the U.S. I'm sure there's issues too, but they're going to have all of these problems from that. And it also goes back to like, if you have your savings in a home, it's very hard to move. You don't want to leave the area because your majority of your net worth is in this one home. And selling a home, for anyone, I haven't done it, but for anyone who's ever done it, I'm sure they know it's not an easy process. At least in the States, you got to get realtors involved. You have closing fees. It takes 30, 60, 90 days, whatever it takes. I mean, it is a pain in the ass, I'm sure, to sell your home and then to move all your crap out, find a new place. Like, it's a whole process. Whereas now, if you have the majority of your wealth in Bitcoin, it's like, well, yeah, I'm sure you don't want to leave Taiwan, but if and pray to God China doesn't invade Taiwan and it turns into a whole World War III thing, I don't want to see that. But I feel like Bitcoin is a deterrent because if you know the majority or the more people who store their wealth in something like that, then it's like, all right, I can just take 12 or 24 words, I can put it on a piece of paper, I can put it on a piece of steel, I can memorize it, whatever. I can take that with me and I'm portable. And that, like I said, I'm sure most people don't want to leave their homes, but just knowing that they have that flexibility to move. First, like if your whole net worth is in your house, it would take a lot more to get someone to just get up and be like, I'm moving now because I do not want to put up with this government, or I don't want to put up with the CC, or whatever it might be. And I mean, that's across the globe. China and Taiwan aren't the only two places in the world. I'm sure there's plenty of places who, people who aren't happy with their leaders and want to move to somewhere else where they think the leaders are doing a better job. And I think Bitcoin enables that. And it's very hopeful to see countries like El Salvador kind of lead the way. I know the Central African Republic also adopted it as legal tender, but I haven't done too much research, but from what I've seen, they also let in the shitcoiners. I saw one stat, like, it's not funny, but it is kind of funny.
No, it's funny.
Out of like 199 countries, at least from whatever thing I saw, the Central African Republic was the 197th poorest country in the world. And after they let the
resources, though.
They got mad resources, but after they let the shitcoiners and they went from 197 to 199, and maybe someone fact me, I'm not sure on that, but I mean, that is a sign of what shitcoining will do. And then you look at El Salvador, and they were Bitcoin only.
Look out. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't shitcoin, kids. It's very bad. But you look at what El Salvador did, and I think they're lucky to have Max Kaiser and Stacey there to kind of help guide them. But as much as the mainstream media loves to take chip shots and be like, oh, they're down on their spot price of Bitcoin, GDP's in double digits. Bitcoiners are trying to come there. The tourist industry is going through the roof. I mean, just like every anecdotal pieces of evidence I can see from podcasts, from people who visited, etc., it seems like El Salvador is just getting better and better. And I think a lot more nation states are going to catch on, and then a lot more, people in positions of influence and power are going to be like, well, shit, maybe we shouldn't, terrorize our civilians, because now they can just say, screw this. They don't have to keep their wealth in a house. They don't have to keep I mean, they can. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's trusted, it's what people know. But just the fact that you have that optionality to be like, if I am not getting the services I deserve from the taxes I pay, I can leave, and I don't care what laws you have. Like, if at some point, the tyranny is through the roof, some people are going to just flip a middle finger and say, I'm not paying your extra tax, screw this, I'm gone, and they'll move somewhere else, and good luck trying to get that Bitcoin.
Yeah, good luck trying to get the Bitcoin if someone chooses to run for the exits. I am concerned with that increasing global optionality at the same time, because I wonder what the incentives are for people to invest in their communities and their sense of place and take care of their commons. Like, I used to be really interested in digital nomad lifestyle, where you just live one place, work one place for 3 months, check it out, go to the next place, and travel. And of course, there's so much to be gained from travel, but I'm increasingly interested in what roots give you. Whether that's in Boston, whether that's in Taiwan, whether that's in El Salvador, whether that's anywhere. I think there's a lot to be gained from having community somewhere. And I think El Salvador does stand to benefit from embracing that community, but I wonder what's going to erode from people being allowed to exit. And my hope is that not too many places erode, that people can still, foster and maintain their communities and not just burn it all down.
Yeah, that's a really good point that I hadn't thought of. It's like that optionality is a blessing in a way, but it's also a curse. And you kind of, it's like in Bitcoin, how it's trade-offs pretty much all the way down. How you live your lifestyle. Like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's exciting and fun to go and travel places, but there's also something special about having that community of people. And I mean, as much as we love to say Bitcoin fixes this, and as great as Bitcoin is, it does not fix all the problems of the world. And I think what's equally important to having a sovereign money, a money that can't have the weights and measures changed by some arbitrary group of 12 dudes who sit on the FOMC. I think it's also incredibly important to have those roots planted. So if shit does hit the fan, it's like, all right, well, I know that I have my neighbor who homesteads, and I know that we're not going to put up with tyranny. And, just to have that group of people, it's like, you become so much more expensive to tyranny, and I think that's incredibly important in a world where it's awesome to see the privacy tools being built out, but it's like it's a two-way street, and it's also becoming some sort of digital panopticon. And you ever read a book like 1984, or I've been meaning to read Huxley's New World Order as well. But it's like a great quote. It's like, the only thing George Orwell got wrong is that he didn't realize that we would just willingly put Big Brother in our pockets via our phones. And like if Apple or Microsoft or I guess Google could say on Android, I don't think they're going to do it, but theoretically, there's nothing stopping them from putting a script on their software and, searching all these devices for private keys and then polling them. And, I'm sure there's plenty of Bitcoiners who have hardware wallets, and that's great. And you should have a hardware wallet, and hopefully you keep your savings, the majority of your Bitcoin in cold storage. But for all the, whatever amount you have on your phone, if, Apple or Google, or if the United States government basically did a 6102, but for Bitcoin, and for those Executive Order 6102 is when they try to confiscate gold. If they did something like that, and they painted Apple in a corner, well, I don't think Apple's standing up to the U.S. military. They're like, all right, I guess we're going to have to sweep everyone's phones for private keys, and we'll give you whatever amount of fiat for that Bitcoin because, there's eminent domain, and we have to pay that. But if they print that fiat out of thin air, it's going to lose purchasing power like that, and then they're going to have all the Bitcoin, and then they prolong themselves. So it's just something to consider. And it's a really good point you made about, like, it's very important to have those roots planted, because as great as Bitcoin is and as much as it fixes, we still reside in meat space, and Bitcoin doesn't fix the reality of us being in meat space.
I think the bigger 6102 issue is the custodians, for sure. It's everyone. And even like MetaMask in their terms of service now, it's like, we're going to deduct the taxes automatically if we need to.
Are they really?
Yeah, there's something about that.
Oh my gosh. I saw the thing where, like, if you're in Venezuela or other countries like North Korea, et cetera, that is on the U.S. shit list, you can't use MetaMask. And that is just like, for a decentralized wallet or whatever, that's insane. Also, now to just you telling me that NFT you sold, now it's going to be on your taxes, and if you try and like hide the fact that you sold the freaking whatever it was.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because I guess they have the ability to just push a software update without your authorization. That's the big issue. But that's where you have to hold your own keys for significant amounts. It's good to Uncle Jim people to get them on, but if they're in if you have your KYC'd custodial account, you're making purchases there, not your keys, not your coins. Someone could just pull that at any time.
Yeah, 100%. That's what's so important too about building out in public, and like what I appreciate you do with Payjoin, and there's 1,000 other Bitcoin projects that are just building out in public. You look at the Nostr protocol, that was from an open source initiative. It's not that I run a node, but I didn't sit there and go through the Bitcoin Core GitHub and like read every line of code. Like there's so much, but then I know all the Bitcoiners who came before me, a lot of them have reviewed that code and made sure that, and there have been malicious actors trying to push bits that aren't good for the protocol. But, the Bitcoin Core developers, who are gatekeepers in a way, but positive gatekeepers, I'd argue, they've done that work. And I think I don't know if MetaMask is open source. I'm assuming no, but I just think it just kind of emphasizes the point. It's so important to build.
You're assuming no about what?
That MetaMask is not open.
Oh,
source
yeah,
software.
I think it is open source. Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
So is that how people saw that they were pushing these updates where it's like now it's
Well, I think you're doing publishing through the Chrome App Store.
mm,
Yeah, it's not. I don't think people compile MetaMask and run it in a compiled version of Chromium on their own machine. Maybe someone does.
yeah, there's some dev out there.
Yeah, and it uses their, uh, it doesn't run a node. You're using an Infura node
Yep.
to get all that data.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I mean, it just seems, at least in the Bitcoin community, obviously MetaMask is a wallet. I don't even know. I don't even think you can have Bitcoin on MetaMask. Could be wrong on that. But just the ethos and the community in Bitcoin seems so focused on providing a more beneficial service to humanity, a form of money that the weight of measurements can't be tampered with. And if you look at Ether or all these other projects out there, I mean, it's essentially just Fiat 2.0. There's a group of people who can create those tokens out of thin air. They can manipulate them. They can, I mean, there's the famous, things of like Vitalik telling the Ether group, like, hey guys, please stop trading for a second. It's just important not to have that because
It's easier with the narrow focus on just money, I think. It's great that Bitcoin has that focus that it's not a strict focus. There are definitely people who want to build all sorts of smart contracts on Bitcoin, and I think it stands to benefit from that. But the fact that the core development, and when I say core development, I'm not talking about like Bitcoin core, like the essential development has been the improvement of money, an upgrade to what we think of as money, as humanity, that technology. The fact that we can focus on that, and we have a cypherpunk culture of religious rules, what's okay, what's not, where we draw the line at censorship resistant. You should be able to build it yourself and run it yourself on your own hardware, at least to the best of our ability. There's so many stacks. I mean, if we're running an Apple operating system, like you were talking about with the phones, you don't know what's really on that, but we're doing as much as we can to allow that possibility where people can take sovereignty, can take that responsibility, and have the option for a monetary system that doesn't rely on third-party permission. Yeah, the fact that we focused on that has been the greatest contributor to the success of Bitcoin.
yeah, that's an excellent point. It's like Michael Saylor talks about, like the broader you try and make your your scope, the less you can focus in. Whereas if you just narrow it down, the more you can narrow it, the farther along you can get with something. And I mean that applies to everything. But if you look at like Bitcoin versus Ethereum, it does seem like they might be doing some cool experimental things. And like I can understand if you're an artist or whatever, like wanting to have I can understand why someone would want an NFT. But I think to your point, the more you broaden your focus, the less you're able to get done because you're not laser focused on one thing. And I think it's been so valuable to Bitcoiners that we have tried to focus as money as the one thing, and everything else is secondary to that. And I hope it continues on that path. And I think these next couple, these next 10 years are going to be very interesting, especially as the halving becomes less significant. As it's a lot more significant now when it goes from 6-ish to 3-ish versus when it goes, from in 100 years from now when it's like 50,000 satoshis or 25,000 or whatever the actual numbers are. Obviously, I did not get those numbers correct, but
Yeah, who knows? I don't know how Ethereum development works either. I don't know. I really don't. Bitcoin has the institution of the mailing list. They got the IRC chat rooms and they got the core repo, but I do not know how the Ethereum improvement proposals process works. It's curious. Maybe I should. Maybe I'm ignorant in that regard, and there's something to learn there.
all I know is that on a Bitcoin core node, I can go and see exactly how much Bitcoin exists by running get tx outset info, and no one seems to know how much Ether is out
That's
there.
easy.
And that right there is so important. Like I love whenever someone comes over, I'm like, check this out. That's how many Bitcoin exist. And I know
That is amazing. Yeah, you run that on your laptop. It just works.
It is. I mean, it really is like it's like a psychedelic experience. It's like, holy shit, this is. I own a part of this mini sats, and there will only ever be, like 20.9999999 whatever.
Was that what made it click for you, or was it like sending Bitcoin? Because when I've seen people make and receive lightning payments, that's the thing that I've seen make people's minds explode more than anything else, because I'm just like, oh yeah, that's on your phone now. Like, that's yours. Nobody else is responsible for it. Please keep it safe.
Yeah, I remember in 2017, actually, a buddy showed me a documentary. I was in college at the time. I think it's called Thinking on Bitcoin. It's a great documentary. And I remember watching it like, oh, yeah, this is great. Like, this is awesome. I love this. And then I was like, well, how do I buy some? And someone's like, oh, yeah, Coinbase. And I remember thinking, like, well, isn't like the whole point that it's supposed to be decentralized and I don't need anyone? And rather than like digging in, I was like, all right, whatever. Like, I'll buy some on Coinbase, great. And it wasn't until 2020 that then I got a stimulus check and like something clicked. I was like, all right, this seems pretty important. I should probably go back to this Bitcoin thing and stop just viewing it as like a number graph investment technology. But to your point about Lightning, like I've been at meetups and I've been like, hey, download a wallet of Satoshi, download a Moon wallet. I'll send you $1 right now. And the amount of times I've done that is a lot. But just to see every single time without fail that reaction, like, oh my, I didn't have to sign up for a bank. I didn't have to do any KYC. It just worked immediately. And I think that's so important because then you get the gears turnings and then hopefully that person will go on and start evangelizing Bitcoin to other people and join our nice little cult.
Yeah, they'll follow the prophecy.
100%. But yeah, man, it's been a pleasure having you on. Where can people find you on the internet to learn more about yourself or Payjoin if they want to install it on their Bitcoin nodes?
Yeah, my personal website is bitgould.com. You can find me at bitgould, Gould, on Twitter. To learn more about Payjoin, check out payjoin.org. There is the who, what, when, where, why, how it works, and some documentation to take a stab at it yourself and use it. I think that's it. Yeah, you can find me on Nostr directory if you look up bitgould too. I'm there. It's on my website. Yeah.
Cool. Perfect. Yeah, we'll have all that in the show notes. And yeah, I appreciate you coming on and have to do this again in the future.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Thanks for having me. I'd love to do it again.
Awesome. Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you guys for listening.